Okay. Hello. Let's talk for a couple of minutes about virtual desktop infrastructure, in other words, VDI. What is VDI? Well, it's a technology that has been around for a while, but it's maturing just recently to deliver PC experience using a central server as a CPU. So 40 years after the onset of the PC revolution, we're basically going back to the initial concept of having a terminal. However, this time the terminal is far from being dumb, is an extremely intelligent one. Remember that only screenshots will actually reach the client side, but that still presents some significant challenges from the deployment perspective. So how VDI works? Well, the main difference between VDI and anything else that we know is that think for a minute as a terminal at a terminal server, right? Using LTP. In essence, you have a relationship of one-to-one, and there is some constraints. VDI, or the secret of VDI, is the introduction of a layer between the hardware and the operating system called hypervisor. And that hypervisor allows a server to create multiple platforms that are completely independent from the hardware platforms. Why not? Well, Gartner estimates that within 2 years, we're going to reach pretty much about 50 million units of virtual desktops. Obviously, the market is about to explode. There is another prediction that VDI will be ready for marketing or for wholesale consumption somewhere around 2010. This is now. So obviously, we are hearing a lot of companies that are either planning or actually engaged in distribution of VDI technology. And it's pretty important to understand what the pitfalls are, how we propose to prepare for that eventuality. So we need to remember, first of all, that there are three main flavors of VDI implementation. The player has been around for a while is obviously Citrix. We all remember Citrix for MetaFrame, ICA clients. Citrix have developed a whole concept of VDI implementation using Zen desktops. They have defined their own protocols, they have their own methodology, and however, it's pretty popular environment. The other new contender is obviously VMware. VMware, a huge player in the virtualization market. Obviously, it makes a lot of sense to virtualize your server. Why not to virtualize your clients? And VMware is doing that by utilizing their technology. It's called View 4. And they also have developed a particular protocol for VDI called PC over IP. The third contender don't have much of a particular set of products themselves. However, they're probably the most widely deployed in the market is obviously Microsoft. They use some version of Zen technology. That's, by the way, it's an open source protocol. But what makes Microsoft unique is that Windows 7 is a natural client or natural environment to deploy it as VDI. So let's talk about a couple of advantages. Well, obviously, it reduced costs on purchasing computers, right? Because you basically can deploy 2-3 versions of operating systems or technology than a desktop computer. It's centralized management. It allows you to reduce your desktop cost. Why? Because you basically don't have to deal with hundreds of different permutations. You have a centralized environment. All the applications are running centralized, and with all the associated advantages. You have secure remote access. You have high degree of compliancy with HIPAA and Sarbanes-Oxley. Why? Because there are no drivers. You cannot copy information easily from a VDI terminal into your single USB key or walk out with the data with your hard drive. So many advantages of that. What are the common elements of all VDI implementations? Well, number one, all the processing is going to happen at the server farm. So you are going to need large servers that can run hundreds, if not thousands, of separate instances. Think of this as a PC on a super environment where you are going to run hundreds or if not thousands of parallel sessions on the server side. All the traffic to the client is only the screenshot. So in other words, the amount of traffic that you need to deploy to the remote locations is much smaller than a complete application. You're going to pass or transfer only the image that you see on the screen rather than the gigabits of traffic that otherwise you will be sending to a fat client. The next one is a plus but also a problematic one. You have to have network connectivity to a client in order to operate. Yes, some implementations allow you a local copy or to operate somewhat limited on an offline fashion, but remember, in principle, if there is no network, there is no VDI client. And obviously from our perspective, network delay and network availability, the size of the pipe, the length of the pipe, will impact significantly the traffic to the client. So, what is Shunra bringing into the picture? Well, obviously, Shunra being the web, mobile, and cloud company provides you with your private version of a network for testing purposes. Remember, you need to test here two separate and distinctive elements. On one hand, the server farm. How much or how many sessions you can actually create on the server farm. You need to go and create load into this farm through a network to actually recreate and understand the dynamic of the server sessions. But more important, the other end of the spectrum, how many clients can you deploy from the server farm? Number one, what kind of network resources are going to be required to provide network connectivity to those resources? Let's say that you are deploying 10,000 VDI clients worldwide. Well, some of them are going to be here in the US, some of them are going to be in your remote location. How much traffic can you funnel through your existing network? In other words, are you going to need to make changes to your infrastructure? Well, we will help you to find out with our technology, with our methodology. So let's see how we do it. Well, we will create, with the help of our appliance technology, a replica of your production network. And obviously, we will deploy in that virtual network your remote locations, different endpoints. Each endpoint we will allocate virtually in our modeling software the size of the existing or of the projected pipes to those locations, and we will force the behavior of your production network. We will sample the behavior of the production network with our tools, with Network Catcher, for example, and insert the behavior into each one of the clouds between the server farm and the remote locations. So, in other words, we will create a virtual lab for you where you have your different locations, where you might have different numbers of users in those locations, and will allow you to generate the traffic from the clients to the server, number one. Number two, assess the performance of those clients from the remote locations. Why this is important? Because obviously a client, if your server is in New York City and endpoint number one is in Charlotte, North Carolina, you are talking about 30, 40 milliseconds of latency. But if your endpoint number 2 is in Singapore, you are talking about 225 milliseconds of latency. That's a huge difference. So obviously, even if we know that we are only transferring screenshots, still that's a lot of data that you need to transfer, especially in protocols, for example, like PC over IP, where you might be transferring video or voice or a video streaming, for example. So obviously, that's a lot of data to transfer, and you want to understand exactly how the bandwidth is being utilized, how much bandwidth you're going to need for each customer, how many bandwidth, how many users you can actually put on an aggregate pod, and how they will behave. What good will be the reception? How well we'll be able to hear you in a remote location, just for one example, and what will be the performance in terms of speed of transferring those screens, in terms of the performance of the application and the user experience at all. So obviously, we will provide you all that information as you test for each one of the remote locations. So to summarize, VDI is becoming very quickly a very popular option. It requires a very careful planning and testing. And because it requires careful planning and testing, Shunra is the safest, most accurate, and easy to implement testing environment for VDI implementation. Why? Because we allow you to create a parallel environment, not in your production, but quasi-production, that will replicate the exact behavior of your production network. So now we can allow you to create an environment that will work like you're using in Singapore, in Charlotte, North Carolina, or San Francisco, and assess exactly how they will behave on a VDI environment. And number two, very important, how much bandwidth you are going to need to deploy to those locations to accommodate the thousands of VDI users. So thank you for your time. And if you have any questions, please send them directly to Shunra, www.shunra.com. Have a great day.